Hey everyone, today I'm actually going to walk you through another exciting topic. Uh, Today is going to be the third lecture of the week, and of course, the last topic of the week. Give me 1 second to pull up my screen. Okay, I want to welcome you to my lecture today. Today, I'm actually going to be walking you through what I call further topics in data gathering. Uh, Before I go into today's business, I would like to remind you of to have a kind of review on what we've done before. Uh, this week, I actually introduced you to what I call method of data collection, to types of studies, and right now the focus is actually going to be on further topics in data gathering. Of course, the outline for today is actually going to be, you'll be able to understand how to determine which type of study is possible. If you can, remember in the last video, I talked about type of studies where I differentiate between observational studies and uh, experimental studies. Now, I think I give you some benefits of each of that. And of course, part of the focus today is just to be able to know the one that can be recommended, okay, or given any research topic. And part of the objective today as well, I'm actually going to focus on, understanding the good and the bad way to sample, okay? Maybe the reason why at times we don't get information that we need from research, maybe we actually uh, we have uh, we got it. The way and manner we take our sample was poor, and that is the reason why I'm actually going to walk you through uh, the poor and the good way to sample. Okay, and the last thing today is actually going to be understanding the good and the bad way to experiment. Okay, so if you know the good and if you know the good way to sample and you don't know the good way to experiment, that may be a tragedy. Okay, and that is the reason why I'm actually going to walk you guys through that. Okay, the first thing I actually want to talk about is determine which type of study is possible. I could remember the other time I actually introduced you to what we call the experimental study and the observational study. And I remember I give an example where, for instance, if you are trying to look at the effect of smoking on health, particularly how smoking could cause cancer. Of course, if you are to embark on observational study, what you just actually need to do is to just look, if you can go either retrospective or prospective, okay, where you actually going to make use of available data on, those who have smoked for several years, and you actually need to measure the lung cavity, okay, get a lung cavity of those who have smoked for so many years, okay. So that is an observational study. But when you take a look at the experimental study, of course, you're actually going to ask participants, you need to ask people to smoke for 10 years. But the question now is, who is ready to do that for you? Who is going to wait for 10 years? How are you so sure those in your cohorts are not going to drop out at the end of the day? Do you have resources to monitor people for 10 years? Stuff like that. And that is the reason why in some situation, the experimental study uh, may be appropriate. And in some situation, the observational study may be appropriate. And if you take a look at what I said right here, I said, medical experiments are often performed over a short time period, or often, with your exposure to treatment that will not be out of ordinary. We don't, we don't want a situation whereby I think it's going to be costly and unethical if you actually did that for so many years. Just like the example I cited, trying to study the effect of smoking on how it affects, how it causes cancer. And I said another reason why non-experimental study. When I say non-experimental study, I'm actually referring to observational study. Another reason why they are is common is that many questions of interest do not involve trying to assess causality. Now, let me tell you this. Experimental study actually demonstrate causation. Causation in the sense that how does a particular variable affect the other one? And of course, the variable that affect the other one is actually going to be the explanatory variable. And of course, you are trying to observe the effect of that on the response. Therefore, if you are trying to perform that kind of study, you actually need to look beyond observational study, because you are not going to get a very good result. And I said, because inferences, and at times, using human beings for research could give a good, give a better result than using animals. I could remember in the past, where condemned prisoner, they normally use, that was in the past for research, okay? And the results they have been getting from that have been very superb. But because of human rights, okay, you cannot just use human beings for research without seeking their consent, okay? And that is the reason why at times the researcher resort to using rats, using animals that believe they have, probably the way their body function. I'm talking about physiology. Okay, they have, a physiological kind of activity or trait that is very close to that of human beings. And that is the reason why I said, because inferences about human population are more trustworthy when we use samples from human subjects than when we use samples from animal subjects. Scientists often resort to observational studies. And that is the reason why scientists will resort to observational studies, because of human rights. Because if you really want to experiment, of course, you're going to make use of human beings. Probably you want to conduct something that has to do with human beings. Like right now, we're in the middle of pandemic, and every country in the world, they are trying to look for vaccine. It's a kind of a vaccine race. And of course, in this type of research, the COVID-19 has not, we've not experienced that before until now, because what was used to treat Ebola or SARS and the like, you cannot just use that to treat COVID-19. Otherwise, we are not going to be having high cases of that, the way we are having the high cases of COVID right now. So which means human beings have to be used for research. I mean, in the clinical trial. And you cannot, because of human rights, you cannot just use you know, any human being without somebody who want to volunteer for that kind of research, because it could be suicidal. It's very risky. And you can't, because of that, and say, okay, maybe I'm going to settle for alternative. Okay, I'm going to use animals. Let me use animals. Human being is not animal. I mean, you know, the fact that some animals have physiological trait that is very close to human being, that doesn't, make them to have exactly the the physiological structure of the same as human. And in this kind of situation, I think it will be very costly, to actually use your experimental study. You got to resort to observational study, except you have some volunteers, okay, who are ready, who can actually who are ready to have you injected uh, the virus into their body. Okay, if you are conducting research, I think you need data for your analysis. Particularly, there are some data, that you can actually find online. Okay, there is a particular body called General Social Survey, and this body conducts survey in uh, in the United States of America, where they ask, they sample the opinion of citizens of this country uh, on their perception or on their belief about a particular policy of government. And I think there's this organization called Gallup. Okay, that is what Gallup. From time to time, they sample American citizens and they ask them questions about the way uh, they ask them to rate the way presidents actually handle their job, handle the economy. Then they ask them to rate it, And of course, if you uh, watch media organization, you're actually going to see rating from time to time of the president, the way he handle economy, the way he handle different kind of issues in the polity. Okay, so if you need data online, you can actually visit http://fedstart.site.usa.gov. Okay, if you need something that has to do with Canada, of course, it's right there with from Mexico, United Kingdom, and Australia. Of course, you got a link, okay, that you can actually exploit. Okay, the next thing I'm actually going to talk about now, what are the ways of collecting data? This is different from methods of collecting data. I could remember in the last, I think the lecture on Monday, I actually gave you some methods of collecting data. It's different from ways of collecting data. Okay. Now, when I talk about, uh, if I let me remind you of what we did, or about the method of collecting data. I talk about the interview method, um, the observation method, and the like. But what I want to talk about right now is just ways of collecting data. Number one is what we call census, and number two is what we call sample surveys. What do you mean by census? Census means complete enumeration. A process by which everybody in the target population, every item in the target population is being examined. Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution of the United States of America actually have it that every 10 years, census should be, should be undertaken in the United States, where they counted, where they're trying to know the number of people in the United States of America. I think the first thing was done in 1790. And as of 1790, to the best of my knowledge, the population of America at 1790 was 3.9 million people. And of course, that was due to, Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution that stipulates that, that counting should be done. And ever since 1790, that have been done every 10 years. So like I said, in 1790, American population was 3.9 million people. But now in 2020, according to US Census Bureau, American population is more than 331 million people. America is the third largest population in the world. They follow the demographic billionaires like China and India. Well, China has about 1.4 billion people. And of course, it's followed by India, and American is the third largest population in the world. Like I said, that was census. When you're trying to know the totality of people in your country, not only that, if you actually want to carry out investigation about, for instance, you want to know the average household income in the United States or in a particular country, and you decided to study everybody in that country, examine all those people who are income earners in that country. That's a census. It is not only when you are counting that that we call census. And that was why I call that complete enumeration. But you know what? Having a complete enumeration is not advisable, because the disadvantage of that is that you're going to waste time and you're going to cost money. Imagine you want to study the entire people in this country or in a particular country. And it is not until you study everybody that you'll be able to get information we need. And that is the reason why sample survey is what we do, what we always conduct most of the time. Sample survey means partial enumeration, situation whereby I don't necessarily need to study everybody in the target population. I just need to take a sample of people, then I'm actually going to investigate them. I'm done. And that is the reason why the General Social Survey that I call GSS is an example of a sample survey. This organization gathers information by interviewing a sample of subjects from the US adult population to provide a snapshot of that population. Because the belief here is that when you take a sample from a population, at the end of the day, you're actually going to generalize on the entire population using what I call inductive process. What do we mean by inductive process? The process of going from specific occurrence or specific incidents to generality, where you are trying to use the knowledge of a few to generalize on the entire population. That is what we do in sample survey. Okay. I put an exercise right here just for you to be able to, because in the next assignment, I'm actually going to ask a couple of questions where I may ask you to differentiate from a particular study. I can ask you to identify different kind of stuff. I can ask you to investigate whether a particular study is observational study or experimental study. I can also ask you to identify variables in a question. Okay, I can ask you to identify variable in a question. I can ask you to specify whether it's explanatory variable or is dependent variable. I can ask you to do that. Okay. Another thing I'm also going to talk about now. Take a look at this question right now. This question has to do with high blood pressure and binge drinking. Now, it said many studies have demonstrated that high blood pressure increases the risk of developing heart disease or having a stroke. Take a look at that. Looking at the effects of high blood pressure on how it actually could lead to the risk of developing an heart attack or a stroke. Now, it is also safe to say that the health risks associated with binge drinking far outweigh any benefits, rather. And a study published in Health magazine in 2010 suggested that a combination of the two could be a leather mix. And as part of the study that follows 6,100 South Korean men aged 55 and over for 2 decades, men with high blood pressure who being drunk even occasionally had double the risk of dying from a stroke or a heart attack when compared to teetotalers with normal blood pressure. Now take a look at this. Is this an observational or experimental study? Or if you want to answer this question, I need you to tell me whether it's an observational or experimental, and I think I can actually give you you're going to get a full credit if you tell me the reason why. Why do you think so? Okay. And another thing is identify the explanatory and the response variables. And the third question said, does the study prove that a combination of high blood pressure and a binge drinking causes an increased risk of death by heart attack or stroke? Why or why not? I want to tell you that this is an observational study because you cannot actually uh, uh, do this by experimenting. Okay, you cannot do this by experimenting, and this is going to be costly. You know, if you follow my explanation of what I've offered before, and of course identify the explanatory and the response variable. Of course, the explanatory variable here is actually going to be whether the high blood pressure and the binge drinker status. Don't forget you are looking at the effect of that. Okay, so that's an explanatory variable. Another name for explanatory variable is independent variable. It's a variable that you can manipulate and observe its effect on another variable. Now, the response in this game is actually going to be the outcome. Outcome of what? We're talking about heart attack or a stroke. Okay? Whether or not the death is due to heart attack or stroke. And C, does the study prove that a combination of high blood pressure and binge drinking causes an increased risk of death by heart attack or stroke? Why or why not? Why is because this is an observational study. An observational study does not promote causation. And what I have here, I'm talking about causation, how one variable causes the other to happen. And that is the reason why I said, observational study cannot demonstrate causation. Okay, it is only experimental study that demonstrate causation. And in this study, observational study applies. Therefore, observational study does not promote causation. Okay, this is another question. Explain whether an experiment or an observational study would be more appropriate to investigate the following. Number 1, A, whether smoking has effect on coronary heart disease. B, whether higher SAT score tend to be positively associated with a higher college GPAs, C, whether a special coupon attached to the outside of a catalog makes recipients more likely to order products from a mail order company. If you take a look at number 1, whether smoking has effects on coronary heart disease, This is an observational study. It's an observational study because a researcher cannot randomize subjects to different groups. You are actually talking about smokers, and you are looking at the effect of smoking on coronary heart disease. And just like the example I said the other time, if you really want to use for experimental study, you're actually going to monitor the smoking the smoking pattern, the way these people smoke over time, and and actually measure whether they're going to have coronary heart disease. Of course, in the study, you need two groups of study. You need a control. You need the experimental group. In the control group, the control group will actually going to be people that have coronary heart disease but without smoking history. And in the experimental group, people that have coronary disease with and they actually smoke for so many years. So the reason why observational study would be good, will be more appropriate for this, is because, of course, you can actually look either retrospective or prospective. Okay, by retrospective, you take a look at the data available. Okay, to see those who have heart, the coronary heart disease, and you're actually going to classify them into whether they have what is it called, they've been smoking or they've not been smoking, because you actually want to look at the effects of smoking on having the coronary heart disease. Now, the second one, whether higher SAT score tend to be positively associated with a higher college GPAs. This is going to be an observational. You only need to make use of the available data. Where students have already written exam, they've written SAT exam, and they have a SAT scores. Okay, and you want to see whether higher SAT score tend to positively associate with the higher college GPAs. These students as well, they've been admitted into college, and you have the GPA for the college. You also have the GPA for the when they were in high school. The SAT score. Okay, so this as the data is already you can get the data because this has already been done. You cannot experiment in this situation, because will you now tell some student, oh, you student, go and write SAT for the purpose of, just because I want to do research. You need to go and write, and I need to monitor you. You write SAT, and I'm going to look at your score, and after writing SAT, then you need to go to the college, and you can't do that, because the student know the reason why they go to high school. They know the reason why they go to college. You can't force them to do so. They may decide not to go, and that is the reason why here observational study is actually more appropriate. Okay, and see whether a special coupon attached to the outside of a catalog make a recipient more likely to order products from a mail order. Here you are looking at the effect of special coupon. Coupon is when you go to some grocery store, or you go to a public place where you can actually order or buy stuff. At times they use that to entice. They use that to entice consumers, probably to buy commodity, okay, by giving out coupon. And with coupon, of course, you're actually going to have a kind of a decrease in what you actually in price, in what you are going to pay, and that will encourage purchasing power. Of course, this is an experimental study. Experimental study in the sense that you can actually perform this experiment, and then see for yourself what really happened, and study the behavior pattern. You study the way consumers are actually going to react. Okay, so like I said, in the subsequent assignment, I'm actually going to give you some questions where I'm actually going to ask a question like this, where you need to identify whether what type of study is appropriate. It's going to be experimental study, or observational study, and some other, top questions that may come along. And of course, that will enable you to be able to understand when you are conducting any research, you'll be able to know whether you should use observational study or you should use experimental study. And the essence of you taking this course is just for you to be statistically guided on the appropriate type of studies you're actually going to adopt in your research. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about right now, whether you are conducting sensors or sample survey, particularly there's something we call bias. Okay, and of course we normally have bias, particularly in sample survey, where the sample that we choose is not a good representative of the population. I think the huge issue with the sample, issue with taking sample is we need to be able to understand the way and manner we are choosing sample from the population, because the sample we are actually going to choose must be a very good representative of the population. And in a situation where the sample is not is not a good representative of the population, then it's actually going to lead to what we call bias. Okay, and because of that, I actually want to discuss the sources of potential bias in sample survey. And number one is what we call sampling bias. And what do we mean by sampling bias? Before I go into what I call sampling bias, I think the next thing I'm actually going to tell you is that when you want to use a sample survey, when you are conducting sample survey against sensors, sensor is a complete enumeration, and while sample survey is a partial enumeration. If you resort to taking sample from a population, for instance, before you can take sample from a population, you need to be able to identify a target population. What is a target population? The population of interest. The population through which a study is actually going to be conducted. Okay, when I do that, I need to be able to identify sampling frame. Sampling frame is a listing of items in that population. For instance, if I want to carry out study among the students of University of Minnesota, or among the students of University of Chicago, what am I going to do? And I don't want to study everybody, every student in the university, because I'm actually going to spend more, and it's actually going to waste my time. And at times we need the results. We need to solve a problem on time so that we don't get overwhelmed by the problem. Okay, so I actually need what I call a sampling frame. In that situation, the sampling frame will be the list of students. Can I have a kind of list that contains all the students in that particular university? Of course, I can actually check the register, student register, okay, to be able to do that. And let me tell you this. Like I said, how can we ensure a very good representative, okay, the sample that I choose from that population? How can I be sure that that is a very good representative of the population? Because if it is not a good representative, of course, it could lead to bias, and bias is not good. Bias will undermine the results of a research. And the bias is actually going to be the one that I can trace to sample if and only if, for instance, I actually want to investigate, and I'm using a sample, and if my sampling frame is a phone survey, if my sampling frame is the landlines, I'm talking about landlines, and also I said a phone survey using landlines. Of course, the people that are homeless, they don't have their phone. then it means they will actually be caught out. And you don't know whether they have a tangible information. They're going to be left out. What about those people in prison? They don't use phone. The people in prison, they're going to be left out. Okay? Or people who don't have landline phone, just like what I said. And that's, then it means the kind of sample that we're actually going to get, excluding them, then it's actually going to lead to bias. And the name of that bias is sampling bias due to sample, just because you are actually using an inadequate sampling frame. The next thing I'm actually going to talk about now is what we call non-response bias. I think when I say non-response bias, the non-response bias, at times you may want to interview people, whether by face-to-face interviewing, or you actually give them, or you send a questionnaire to them to fill. At times you don't get a feedback. Okay, and which means if you don't get a feedback, maybe those people that you don't get a feedback from may have a tangible information. And that's an example of a non-response bias. And that was why I said this occurs when some sample subject cannot be reached or refuse to participate. If you're not able to reach out to them, or they decide not to participate, even when you face them face to face, you ask questions, they're going to tell you, I'm not in the mood, I'm not going to answer your question. Or you send a questionnaire to them to fill, they are not even going to return that. Maybe they are battling with issues, personal issues, family issues. And what are we going to do to get out of this? And that's why we need to do follow-up. We need to do follow-up. If you send questionnaire to somebody to fill and you don't get a feedback, do follow-up. With that, you're actually going to eliminate the non-response bias. I think the non-response bias by Gallup organization, I think it's very close to 30%. But you know what? Experience has shown that when government actually conduct survey, at least I think they have like very small 7%, just 7% non-response rates. Of course, what we want to, there's no way you can completely eliminate non-response rate. But what we actually want to do is to reduce it to, to bare minimum. Okay? Is to reduce that drastically. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. Another source of bias, what we call the response bias. At times, the way we ask questions, the way interviewer asks questions from respondents, may look so confusing that the respondent may be kind of confused on the kind of response is actually going to give. Some of respondents, some of investigators or interviewers at times, the way they ask questions, or the way some of them actually draft the questionnaire, some words may be very, very ambiguous, difficult to understand. And that is the reason why you got to make sure that the way you ask question is very clear and simple if you really want to eliminate response bias. Because the respondent is actually going to answer it the way they want, the way they understand that, because you make your question so complex. And that was the reason why I said an interviewer might ask a question in a leading way, such that subjects are more likely to respond a certain way. Or subject may even lie. The respondent may even lie because they think their response is socially unacceptable. Of course, the way your mood when you are asking questions, there are some questions that the way you're going to ask it and the respondent is actually going to feel bad, telling you the truth. You got to you got to ask your question in a way you're actually going to get the real information that you need. Otherwise, you are not going to get it. And you know what? we need information from people, because the real world of of the existence of the real world is independent of human knowledge, and the only way to understand the world, okay, is through investigation. We need information to be able to have control over the environment we live in. I want to have control over my business. I want to have control over the political environment. I want to have control over medical environment. I want to have control over, economic environment, and so on like that. We need information. So what I just discussed with you right now is just the sources of potential bias in sample survey. And what we do most of the time is to look for a way to minimize this. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is a good and poor way to sample. We got good way to sample, we got poor way to sample, and that is going to be the topic of going to be the objective here. Now, I told you about Gallup organization. If you want to know what they do, you can actually go to www.gallup.com. So this organization conducts a monthly survey about 1,000 American adults. Okay, and they then report the percentage of those sampled who respond approve when asked. And for example, they could ask these adults whether they approve or disapprove of the way the current president of the United States is handling his job as president. And you know what? They're going to sample just 1,000, and they're going to generalize the result on the entire population. Excuse me. Which means they're actually making inference. Okay? So Gallup do that most of the time. Now, like I said, they're going to interview few, and they're going to analyze that, and whatever they have, they're going to generalize that on the entire population. Why do they do that? Of course, and that was why I said, if the sampling is conducted properly, this provides a good estimate of the approval rating within the entire population. That's a generalization, going from particular, going from specific to general. Okay, they've interviewed 1,000 people, and whatever they got, they're actually going to impose that on the entire population as if they've interviewed all Americans. Okay, so if you want to know more if you want to have more information about what the Gallup do, you can actually check www.gallup.com. Okay, if you really want to know the good way and the bad way to sample, I think the best thing I need to do with you is just to first introduce you to what we mean by sampling frame and sampling design. Because if you don't get your sampling adequately, correctly, of course, that could be a bad way to sample. But if you get your sampling frame correctly, then that's one of the good ways to sample. Now, what do I mean by sampling frame? Of course, the sampling frame is just the list of all items in the target population, okay? Of course, you are referring to the complete list of everyone or everything you actually want to study, okay? And you know what? When I talk about population, population means the totality of item, totality of item. Just like the number of item, the population size. But if I want to talk about the sampling frame, I'm talking about the listing of all these items. Okay, so the population of interest may not at times be the general population of the country. It could be the population of, for instance, if I want to talk about, what is it called? The average allowance given to workers, they're in a particular country. That what I'm talking about should be the population of the workforce. I'm not talking about the population of the country in general, but the population of the workforce. And that is what I mean by target population, the population of interest. Okay, and that was why I said the difference between a population and a sampling frame is that this population is general and the sampling frame is specific. And you know what? The moment you identify your sampling frame, all what you just need to do is just to apply the method of selecting, subject, the respondent, from the target population. So before you can do that, you actually need to uh, identify your sample. Give me 1 second. I actually want to plug my laptop right now. Okay, thank you. Now, the next thing I actually want to talk about, if we resolve to taking sample from a population of interest, then what are the sampling techniques that we can use? And let me tell you this, sampling techniques that we can use depends on the nature of the population, and not only the, it depends on the, I think basically on the nature of population. When I say nature of population, it depends on whether population is homogeneous or heterogeneous. What do we mean by homogeneous? A population is said to be homogeneous if there is a low degree of variability. A population is said to be heterogeneous if there is high degree of variability. What I'm presenting to you right now as a sampling techniques to be able to know the one to use in a given situation actually depend on the nature of population, actually depends on whether we're talking about whether the population is homogeneity or the population is heterogeneity. That is the homogeneous and the heterogeneous. And you know what? These sampling techniques are the combination of random sampling and random sampling techniques and non-random sampling techniques. And I'm actually going to walk you through this one after the other. The first one is a simple random sampling. The second one is cluster. The third one is stratified random sampling, systematic sampling, convenient sampling, volunteer sampling, and of course, convenient sampling is also called accidental sampling. Of course, I'm actually going to explain that one by one. Don't forget, if you really want to take sample from a target population, you need a sampling technique. And that is the reason why, what is a technique of sampling that is appropriate for my population? And that's exactly what I want to walk you through right now. Okay. Like I said, I'm actually going to start from simple random sampling. Okay, what do I mean by simple random sampling? A simple random sampling is just a process of sampling where we choose sample from a target population using instruction of chance. What do I mean by instruction of chance? No favoritism, no biasedness in the selection of the sample from the population. So which means every element in that target population has equal chance or probability of being selected. And you know what? When we do that, then that sample is actually going to be an unbiased representation of that population. It's going to be unbiased. And you know what? What we actually want, if it is unbiased, then it means we have actually eliminated bias, because bias is not good. And I'm actually going to give you an example of simple random sampling right now. They use this in a lottery. Okay, if 1,000 people should purchase lottery tickets, of course, by the time they're doing the raffle draw, where they actually want to pick the winner, of course, they're going to do it in a way that the population of those who are competing, you know, everyone in that very population has equal chance of being chosen as the winner. No favoritism, no biasedness. So what I'm trying to say, if there are 1,000 people that actually participated, the probability that a person is actually going to win is going to be 1 divided by 1,000. Of course, we're using simple random sampling in that situation because we are seeing the nature of that population is homogeneous. Homogeneous because though from one individual to the other we differ, but the fact that we're trying to say that they are homogeneous in nature, the degree of variability is very, very small, and that is the reason why we can actually close our eyes and pick on anybody. The Internal Revenue, another example is the Internal Revenue Service in the United States normally use a simple random sample. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you that scenario. You know, when you file tax, of course, there is possibility that the Internal Revenue Service can actually pick at random a particular taxpayer's account for audition. You know, they may want to audit. What is the probability that my but my account will be choosing for that? So they do that at random. Anybody's account can be chosen for audition. They're going to audit that. Anybody's account can be chosen. That's a simple random sampling. Okay. The next thing I'm actually going to talk about is what we call cluster sampling. There are situations whereby, you know, the disadvantage of simple random sampling is it does not actually cut across the population. Okay, there's possibility that your selection could be restricted to a particular section of the population. And how can we actually go out of that? We can actually try to consider a cluster sampling, particularly in a situation whereby, you know, you got a big population size. And what do we actually need to do? You need to divide the population into units. You could decide to divide population into city, you know, depending, like, and that was why I give example. A researcher is interested, you know, in data about, you know, city taxes in Florida. Okay, of course, Florida is a state in the United States. There's so many cities in the United States. I mean, there's so many cities in Florida. Okay, so the researcher will compile data from selected cities. Okay, and compile them to get a picture about the states. Of course, a state that state of Florida has a lot of cities. Okay, so each city is, you know, by the time you compile that could form a cluster. Okay, so the individual city will be clusters in this case. And cluster sampling is often more economical or more practical than the stratified sampling or simple random sampling. Of course, I'm still going to talk about stratified sampling, but of course, I've explained simple random sampling. So I'm going to tell you the example, more example when I'm done of cluster, when I'm done with the stratified sampling. Of course, you know, cluster is also being used on the homogeneous population because assumptions is that, okay, our state of Florida, okay, everyone is more or less the same, but you know what? Instead of choosing what I want to choose at random, I think it's actually going to make sense if I subdivide, the state of Florida into different kind of city. And of course, I'm actually going to pick, you know, a random sampling of city. That's what I'm going to do. Okay. I think another example that I also want to talk about is, marketing companies also use a cluster. Okay. So the kind of cluster they use is like a two-stage cluster. Okay, two-stage cluster in the first that firstly they will randomly select market cities. Okay, and when they collect market city, which I call cluster, and they will randomly select consumer within each of the market city. Okay, the next sampling technique I want to talk about is a stratified random sampling. Of course, the simple random sampling and the cluster sampling are applicable to homogeneous population with a low degree of variability. But when you talk about stratified random sampling, of course, the population is heterogeneous. Okay? It's heterogeneous, and you actually need to stratify the population into various strata in such a way that in each stratum, you're going to go from one stratum to the other to take a random sample. Though we have a different way to choose to take a random sample after you have subdivided the population into strata. Some of you may want to argue that with me. What then is the difference between cluster and stratified sampling? Though we are also subdividing you in cluster, but only that the nature of the population in cluster is homogeneous. But the nature of population, before you can apply stratified sampling, is heterogeneous in nature. And we have different kind of agent of stratification. I want to give you an example right now. Assuming that we actually want to investigate the performance of sophomore a sophomore in American colleges. Okay, and of course, if we really want to do that, we can actually stratify them across disciplines. Disciplines in American colleges include, of course, some people are majoring in science, some people are majoring in engineering, some people are majoring in computer science, some people are majoring in mathematics, and some people are majoring in English. Now, if you stratify the population of students in the college, into engineering, into mathematics, into computer science, into those who are majoring in science and those who are majoring in English, then after doing that, why are you doing that? Because you actually want all the discipline to be represented. Although there is possibility that one discipline may have more students than others. And that is the reason why you actually need, we got three ways to do that in stratified sampling. There's something that we call equal allocation, and there's something that we call proportional allocation, and there's something that we call optimal allocation. But most of the time, what people normally use is proportional allocation, because the proportional allocation is going to be okay after stratifying the respondent into various strata. Then, if I want to choose a random sample right now, I'm actually going to choose more from from that particular subgroup that have a lot of people, a lot of respondents, and I'm going to take less sample from a subgroup that have less number of people. And that is the reason why I'm trying to showcase something here where I said, assuming team researches the demographic of college students in the United States and find the percentage of what students major in. You can actually use it. 12% major in English, 20% major in science, 24% major in computer science, 21% major in engineering, and 50% major in maths. So which means we got 5 strata. So student will be choosing from each and every stratum using instruction of chance. This is an example of a stratified random sampling. Okay, the next thing that I actually want to talk about is a systematic random sampling. Systematic random sampling actually it is called systematic sampling because it is also used on the homogeneous population, but only that for you to be able to use systematic sampling, because we actually want to cut across the whole population. For instance, let me give you this an example. If in the target population you have 100 people and you actually want to choose a sample of 10, how can I choose a sample of 10 in such a way that I'm actually going to cut across the whole population? And don't forget, the population is homogeneous in nature. But a way to do that is to go systematic. How can I go systematic? Now the population size is 100. The sample size is 10. Then I need a sampling interval. The sampling interval is actually going to be the ratio of population size to the sample size. 100 divided by 10, that will actually give me 10. Therefore, I need a random start. The random start must lie between 1 and that your particular value of the sampling interval. The sampling interval that I computed here is, I think I'm going to share, for me to be able to explain this to you right now, I'm actually going to have a new share. I'm actually going to have, give me 1 second. I'm actually going to have a new share. I'm actually going to share my whiteboard now. Okay, this is my whiteboard. What I'm trying to explain right now about systematic sampling. What I'm trying to explain about systematic sampling is that if my population size is 100 and the sample size, the sample that I actually want to choose is 10. Now, the symbolic representation of the population is uppercase N, and for the sample is that. Then I need to be able to compute what I call sampling interval. Okay, the sampling interval is actually represented as K, is the ratio of big N to small n. And in this case, it's actually going to be 100 divided by 10. Now, in this case, my sampling interval is 10. Okay, my sampling interval is 10. Now, if my sampling interval is 10, then I actually need to decide on the random start. Okay, I need to decide on the random start. I'm going to clean this right now. I need to decide on the random start. And you know what? The random start, maybe I call that R. The random start must lie between 1 and K. And what is my K? In this case, my K equal to 10. My K equal to 10. So my random start must be greater than 1 and be less than 10. In this case, I can decide to choose any number within that. Okay, if I decide to choose 5, Then the next thing I'm actually going to be doing is to be adding the sampling interval. Don't forget the sampling interval is 10. The next one is going to be 15 plus 10. That will be 25 plus 10, 35, 45, 55, 65, 75, 85, and 95. So if you count there, that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, this actually cut across the population. So this is systematic sampling. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share right now. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to the lecture material. And that is an example of a systematic sampling. Now, convenience sampling. And let me put it to you. Convenience sampling, if you use convenience sampling and the volunteer sampling, convenience sampling is a poor way to sample. Okay? Convenience sample is a poor way to sample. I mean, I'm going to tell you why. What do I mean by convenience sample? Convenience sample is also called an accidental sampling. You know, at times, I don't know whether you are just walking on the streets or you go to a grocery store or you go to a gas station and you accidentally met an investigator that is asking you a question. That's a convenience sampling. Okay? And that's a convenience sampling is a non-probability sampling method. And any non-probability sampling method will actually induce bias. Okay? And that was why I said, for example, standing at a mall or grocery store and asking people to answer questions would be an example of a convenience sample. And another example is you actually want to interview workers and you just go out at your own convenience. Maybe you go out between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. to interview people. You know, the mostly of, you know, the most of the people that you're actually going to have in your cohort may not be workers, because at that time they're actually going to be in their place of work, those who can actually give you the information that you need. And then another convenient sample is just that you actually want to survey the opinion of people about something, and you just decide to go to a golf club. You know, a golf club are mostly patronized by rich people. Then it means poor people will be left out. And maybe the information, those who can actually give you that information may actually be poor people. So in that situation, you are using convenience, and of course, it's a null probability sampling that can actually induce bias. Okay? And that was why. And another question is that, for instance, you want to ask maybe a question from people about maybe romantic relationship. And if you yourself, you are homophobic, if you are homophobic, you know, I'm referring to the interviewer. If you are homophobic, then you are not likely to ask questions from homosexuals. And you don't know that whether homosexuals actually have the information that you were looking for. And that is the reason why I'm actually going to conclude that one of the poor way to sample is to choose a convenient sample. Okay. Another sample techniques that I'm actually going to talk about is a voluntary sample. A voluntary sample. I think I would prefer to call it volunteer. I'm going to call it a volunteer sample. Yeah, instead of a voluntary. I will be more comfortable calling that a volunteer sample. What do I mean by that? You know, at times you may check, probably you receive an information, you saw an information online, and they ask you to volunteer to partake in a survey. Okay, so which is more or less like an online pool. Okay, and there is possibility that some people can decide not to partake in that survey, and of course the result that you are actually going to have may not be binding, may not be a good representative of the population. And that was why I said often the folks have a strong interest, those who have a strong interest in the main topic are those ones that will participate. Okay, and that was why I said, suppose for example that a news show asks viewers to participate in an online poll. This will be a voluntary sample. Okay, we're going to be a volunteer sample. Okay, because the one segment of the population may be more likely to volunteer than other segments because they have a stronger opinion about the issues or are more likely to visit the internet. That's another thing. It's not everybody that visit internet often because of the nature of their work. So those kind of, so it means a good number of people may not partake in the volunteer in this survey. Okay, and I think there's something I actually want to discuss right now. I think around 2000 I think around 2003, maybe January 6, 2003. A peer research actually conducted an online research, okay, where they asked people across party affiliation on whether they can actually yeah, maybe discuss something that has to do with the country or stuff like that online. Okay, so and they estimated that 46% of Republicans said they'd like to register their opinion in online survey, and why only 28% of Democrats agree to that. Now, there is possibility that some Republicans spend more time online than Democrats. Okay, and then because of that, the result of online survey may be more weighted in the direction of the Republican belief than the general population. So, and that is the reason why one of the reasons why the volunteer sample is not, it's not as if it's totally bad. It also has its benefit. I'm still going to talk about its benefit, but you know what? In some situation, if we really want to get information, of course, we need to go beyond the volunteer sample. Now, another thing I'm actually going to talk about is poor sampling frame. I actually told you the other time we got ways how not to sample, okay, and then of course how not to sample is when you undertake a very poor way to sample, and poor way to sample is when you have a poor sampling frame. If your sampling frame is poor, I could remember in 1936 there was a popular magazine called Literary Digest. Literary Digest had predicted the presidential election result correctly prior to 1936 election. But do you know what happened? This particular organization try again to predict 1936 presidential election in the United States. And don't forget, prior to 1936, they had succeeded in predicted correctly, three presidential election before that. But in 1936, they did not get it right because of the poor sampling frame. And I'm actually going to tell you right now, in 1936, the incumbent president actually contested. The incumbent president in 1936 was Franklin Roosevelt, and he was a Democrat. And he contested against Af Landing. Af Landing happens to be a Republican. But do you know that? Do you know what? At that time, the magazine actually made questionnaire. I think 10 million questionnaires to people, and actually asked them how they plan to vote during the election. And you know what? The sampling frame was constructed in a way that they make use of telephone directories, the country club membership, and automobile registrations. And let me tell you this: the those when you talk about the country club membership, they those who really visit, those who have that membership, as at that time, they were mostly Republicans. Okay, and you know what? He actually made out 10 million questionnaire to respondents, and of course, the sampling frame that he used was poor because telephone directories. There's possibility that there are some people that do not have telephones as at that time. Okay, and Republican mostly dominate people in their. Mostly dominate the membership of a country or club. Okay, and looking at the automobile registration, of course, those who may have cars as at that time are those who really, at least who are probably or beyond, either in the middle class or above the middle class. Now, he made out 10 million questionnaires. Apart from the fact that he has a poor design, the non-response rate was huge because 2.3 million people out of 10 million people actually responded. Okay, and this will also lead to another topic, because some of you may argue that with me. Oh, when I have a very large sample size, even if I don't care about the method of data collection, I don't care about this sampling frame or whatever, I'm going to be fine. You are not going to be fine, because this particular magazine actually had 2.3 million responses. Well, that is large. But you know what? The magazine actually predicted that the Republican, as at that time, Laden, was actually going to win with 57% of votes. With a large percentage. Okay, and that was why I said the digest predicted that Landon would win, that it was going to get 57% of votes. And you know what? When you get 57% of votes, you are above 50% of winning as at that time. But do you know what actually happened in the actual election? And I want to tell you, in the actual election, Franklin Roosevelt, a Democrat, actually carried the day. Okay, and Ladan, a Republican candidate that was predicted by Literary Digest magazine to carry the day, had 36% of votes. It was, a landslide victory for the incumbent, the Democrats. So, which means this particular reputable magazine did not get it right. Why is it that they did not get it right? Because they used a poor sampling frame, and not only that, the non-response rate was very high. Okay, and you know what? Because of that, they you know, the business, the magazine business fold up because their reputation was tarnished because of their inability. It was a disgrace because of their inability to predict the election result of that year, despite predicting correctly, 3 previous elections before Franklin Roosevelt. And the takeaway from that scenario is just that a large sample size does not guarantee a non-biased sample, because the literary magazine actually they have a response, the number of people that responded was 2.3 million. 2.3 million is very, very large. And that was why I said, many people think as long as my sample size is large, it doesn't really matter how the sample was selected. That is not true. It matters a lot. And as you can see, that is incorrect, as illustrated in the Literary Digest polls. A sample size of 2.3 million did not prevent poor results. Okay. So, if you know the good way, if you know the bad way to sample, poor way to sample, then the next thing that we actually want to do now, what are the good and the poor way to experiment? To sample is different from to experiment. Of course, the goal of any experiment is to be able to investigate whether there's an association between variables, explanatory variable, and the response. That is the essence. And of course, the advantage of an experimental study over the non-experimental, when I say non-experimental, I mean the observational study, is that it provides a stronger evidence of causation. And that was the reason why I said the other time, when you want to answer question of causation, it's better you go into it's better you go experimental. Now, our studies have reported that regardless of what smokers do to quit, okay, most relapse within a year. Some scientists have suggested that smokers are less likely to relapse if they take an antidepressant. Antidepressant is more or less like a treatment. The moment they take that, they believe that that will actually make the smokers to be less likely to relapse after quitting smoking. Okay, now how can you design an experiment of this nature? I mean, how can you design an experiment to study whether the treatment helps smoker to quit? Of course, if you really want to do this, the best way to do that is actually to have, to have a treatment group and to have a control group. And let me tell you this, you can only go by using volunteer sample here. You cannot randomize in this kind of situation. You need a volunteer sample. You need smokers. Maybe you need to advertise those smokers who have interest in quitting smoking, that you actually have a treatment that you can actually, met on them that will make them less likely to relapse. So you got to use a volunteer sample here. And when you do that, what you need to do, you're going to place some smokers that are ready, okay, those who are volunteer to do that. You're going to put them in one you're going to split them into two different groups, into control and into experimental group. What I mean by treatment group, the people in the experimental group, you're going to give them antidepressants. The people in the control group, you're actually going to give them placebo. And at the end of the day, then you're actually going to observe the effects of that treatment compared to nothing. Okay, and don't forget, you are not going to tell those ones in the control group that you are giving them placebo. In the last lecture, I think I talked about, blindfolding the respondents. We got a single blind and double blind. Okay, now I think the good way to study is to control comparison group. Okay, you got a treatment group, you got a control group. Okay, then another good way to study is to do randomization that I've explained, assigning subjects to group using instruction of chance. And another good way to study is a blinding the study. Blinding the study, don't let the respondent be aware that they are being given placebo. Otherwise, they're going to lose interest. Okay. Now, what is the takeaway from what I've done so far? I want also have a takeaway on, on the key part of a good experiment, and that's exactly what I listed here. I've talked about them. Control comparison group. The control comparison group. Of course, you're going to have two different kind of group: the treatment group and the control group. The treatment group, the people in the treatment group will receive the treatment, and those ones in the control group will receive placebo. And you know what? You're actually going to do blinding, where they are not going to be aware of what they are giving. Or every patient, what they're going to have in mind is that they are being given a drug that's actually going to work on them. And of course, you identify your experimental units, which I call the unit of measurement. There could be there's the subject, the people, animals, and so on like that. Okay? And in your treatment, you need to identify different experimental conditions. At times, there's you could have levels of treatment. Okay? And don't forget, you're actually going to randomly assign the experimental unit to the treatment and, to the control group. And that will actually tend to balance the comparison group with respect to locking variables. And of course, replication of studies increases confidence in conclusion. When you do replication in design, to have a measure of experimental error. Okay, if you want to have a measure of experimental error, then you replicate. Okay. Now, the last thing of the day is key part of a sample survey. Of course, you want to do sample survey, you need to identify the population of interest. Okay. You need to define a sampling frame, which is a list of all items in the target population. Of course, use random sampling implemented using random numbers and so on like that. Use different kinds of sampling technique depending on the nature of population that I talked about the other time. This is where I'm actually going to stop today. And then I hope you're going to enjoy the video if, after watching it. For those of you that may have one or two questions to ask, if you need clarification, of course, you can actually meet with me during my office hours. Until Monday, that I'm actually going to come your way again with another exciting topic. Make sure you stay safe and have a very good weekend. Bye for now.